The Universal Engineering Index had existed for 12,000 years. In that time, it had recorded every important invention from 4,847 different species across 3 arms of the galaxy. The index was more than a simple list. It was a map of how intelligence worked, a proof that discovery followed rules as firm as gravity or the speed of light. Archivist had served the index for 600 years, was not a creature of flesh and blood. Instead, was made of interlocking geometric shapes that floated in a specific pattern, each piece spinning slowly around the others. Species had evolved to find patterns in chaos, to see order where others saw only noise. This made them perfect archivists. On what humans would call a Tuesday, notice something strange. A new species had recently made contact with the galactic community. They called themselves humans, and they came from an unremarkable yellow star in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. Their planet was pleasant enough, with moderate gravity, breathable air, and plenty of water. The humans themselves were carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, and possessed single brains housed in soft skulls. By every measure, they were ordinary. Pulled up the standard analysis. When a new species joined the galactic community, the index made predictions about what they would invent. These predictions were based on 12,000 years of data, and they were almost never wrong. A species that evolved in high gravity would discover new ways to manipulate mass. A species that lived in darkness would master other senses. A species with hive minds would understand quantum connections that seemed like magic to individual thinkers. The predictions for humans were modest. Their tribal history suggested they might contribute something to social organization. Their planet had lots of oil and coal, so perhaps they would advance combustion chemistry. Nothing special, but nothing shameful either. But when looked at the actual submissions from humanity, the geometric shapes that made up the archivist's body froze in place. 17 categories. The humans had filed innovation claims in 17 different categories. Ran the analysis again. The same result appeared. The humans were claiming advances in atmospheric processing, a field dominated by species who breathed ammonia and methane. They were claiming breakthroughs in quantum entanglement communication, something that only hive minds had ever understood before. They were submitting patents for elastic metallurgy, which required an intuitive understanding of pressure that only species from high-gravity worlds possessed. None of this made sense. Began to search for an explanation. Perhaps the humans had stolen these ideas. Perhaps they had hired members of other species to do the work. Perhaps their submissions were simply fraudulent, the desperate lies of a young species trying to seem more important than they were. But the more investigated, the stranger things became. The atmospheric processing technology had been developed by a team at something called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Looked up the researchers. They were all human. They all breathed oxygen. They had no biological reason to understand how to filter ammonia from methane, yet somehow they did. The quantum communication breakthrough had come from a single human working alone in a small laboratory in Shanghai. Her name was Dr. Wei. She was not part of a hive mind. She was not even part of a large team. She was just one person with one brain, and somehow she had solved a problem that should have been invisible to her kind. The elastic metallurgy came from a human named. He had grown up in a country called Ghana, on a part of Earth with perfectly normal gravity. There was nothing in his biology or his environment that should have led him to understand how metals behaved under extreme pressure. Yet his designs were being used in mining operations on worlds where the gravity would crush any human flat. Spent 3 standard days reviewing the evidence. At the end, the archivist was forced to conclude that the submissions were genuine. The humans really had made these discoveries, but this conclusion raised a question that found deeply troubling. How? The Universal Engineering Index was built on a simple idea. Innovation came from advantage. A species discovered what they were built to discover. Their bodies, their brains, their worlds shaped what they could understand. This was not a guess or a theory. It was the result of 12,000 years of observation. It was as close to a law of nature as anything in the social sciences could be. But the humans seemed to be breaking this law. Reported the anomaly to the senior archivists. They reacted with polite disbelief. Surely there was an error. Surely the humans had received help from other species. Surely some explanation existed that would preserve the fundamental order of the index. But had been an archivist for 600 years, knew how to investigate, and was certain that something genuinely new was happening. The senior archivists eventually agreed to form an investigation team. They would travel to Earth and examine the human claims in person. If the humans had cheated, the investigators would find proof. If the humans had somehow done what they claimed, the investigators would need to understand how. Was not chosen for the investigation team. The geometric archivist was considered too specialized for field work, but followed the reports closely as the team made its journey across the galaxy to the small blue world circling its yellow sun. The first reports were confusing. The investigators kept using words that did not translate well into the index's formal language. They spoke of persistence and curiosity and stubbornness. They described humans who had spent years learning subjects that had nothing to do with their bodies or their world. They told stories of failure after failure, followed by inexplicable success. One report stood out too. It described a conversation with an elderly human named Dr. James. He had spent 40 years studying gravitational physics, a field that should have been closed to his species. The investigator had asked him why he bothered. His world had normal gravity. His body could not feel the subtle curves of spacetime. What possible reason did he have to study something so far outside his natural abilities? Doctor had smiled at the question. Then he had said something that would think about for the next several centuries. I wanted to understand, the human had said. That was enough. Turned this phrase over and over. Wanting to understand was not supposed to be enough. Wanting was not the same as being equipped. Every species in the galaxy wanted to understand more than they did. But wanting did not change what your brain could process. Wanting did not reshape your sensory organs. Wanting did not alter the fundamental chemistry of your thoughts. Yet somehow for humans, wanting seemed to work. Began to wonder if the index had missed something. For 12,000 years, they had measured advantages. They had counted biological gifts and environmental pressures and cognitive architectures, but they had never measured desire. They had never asked how badly a species wanted to understand something they were not built to understand. It was possible, realized, that this had never mattered before. Perhaps every other species in the galaxy accepted their limitations. Perhaps they focused on their strengths and did not waste time on their weaknesses. This was logical. This was efficient. This was what the index expected. But what if humans were different? What if they refused to accept their limitations? What if they simply kept trying until they succeeded, no matter how long it took, no matter how many times they failed? The thought was almost offensive to sense of order. Innovation was not supposed to work that way. Discovery was not supposed to be a matter of mere stubbornness. The universe was supposed to make sense. But the data was the data. And the data said that something was happening on that small blue world that the index had never seen before. Created a new file. The geometric archivist labeled it simply, Human Anomaly. Then began to watch and wait and wonder if everything the index believed about innovation was about to change. Senior investigator Ka arrived on Earth expecting to find clever lies. Her species, though, had evolved on a world of predators and prey, where every creature survived by deception. In response, they had developed the ability to sense bioelectric fields. They could feel when a heart beat faster. They could detect the subtle changes in brain chemistry that accompanied dishonesty. In her 300 years of service to the index, Ka had never failed to uncover a fraud. The humans would be no different, she thought. They had claimed innovations that should have been impossible for their biology. This meant they had lied, and when Ka found the lie, she would expose it, and the index would remove their false claims, and the universe would make sense again. Her first interview was with Doctor, a human female who had developed a new method of harvesting energy from the outer layer of stars. This was a technology that had previously belonged only to a species that actually lived in the fire of red dwarf suns. They had evolved to survive temperatures that would vaporize any other known life form. They understood stellar coronae because they swam through them every day. Doctor had never been closer to a star than her own planet's orbit. She could not survive temperatures above what humans called 100 degrees Celsius. She had no biological reason to understand how energy moved through superheated plasma, yet she had apparently solved problems that had puzzled the four. Ka sat across from the human in a small room at something called the Tokyo Institute of Technology. The investigator let her sensory tendrils extend, feeling the subtle currents of the human's nervous system. She was looking for the telltale signs of deception, the flutter of fear, the spike of creative energy that came with inventing lies. She found nothing unusual. Doctor seemed calm and curious, nothing more. "How did you conceive of this approach?" Ka asked. "Your species has no biological adaptation for stellar proximity." Doctor tilted her head slightly. "I read about the systems when I was a graduate student. They were elegant, but I thought they were inefficient. They wasted a lot of energy in the conversion process, so I started wondering if there was a better way." Ka waited for more. When nothing came, she prompted, "And then?" "And then I spent 6 years trying different approaches. Most of them failed. Some of them failed in interesting ways. I kept notes on everything, kept thinking about the problem. Eventually, something worked." The investigator's tendrils twitched. There was no deception in the human's voice, no flutter of concealed truth in her bioelectric field. She was simply stating facts as she understood them. "But you have no innate understanding of plasma dynamics," Ka said. "Your brain did not evolve to process information about stellar environments." "No," Doctor agreed. "I learned it." "You learned it," Ka repeated. "From books mostly, and simulations, and conversations with other researchers, and a lot of trial and error." Ka's tendrils went very still. In 3 centuries of investigation, she had never encountered a species that simply learned fields unrelated to their evolutionary heritage. The who dominated gravitational physics did not study crystalline optics. The who ruled optical computing did not research gravitational manipulation. Each species refined what they were born to understand. That was how intelligence worked. That was how it had always worked. But here sat a small human female, calmly explaining that she had taught herself something her brain was not designed to comprehend. And the terrible thing was that Ka could not detect any deception at all. Over the following months, the investigation team documented hundreds of similar cases. They interviewed a human named who had grown up in poverty in a place called Baltimore. He had shown no early aptitude for mathematics. His test scores had been average. His teachers had not expected him to achieve anything significant. Yet somehow, through what he called sheer bloody-mindedness, he had taught himself theoretical physics and eventually developed a new model of quantum field behavior that was being used across the galaxy. "I failed a lot," told the investigators. "I failed so many times I lost count, but I kept trying. Eventually my brain figured it out." They visited a collective of humans from a landlocked country called Mongolia. These people had never seen an ocean until they were adults. They had no cultural history of sea travel, no ancestral connection to deep water. Yet they had developed revolutionary technology for deep-sea exploration, equipment that was now being used to study the ocean worlds of distant star systems. "We watched videos," one of them explained. "We read everything we could find. We built simulations. When the simulations did not match reality, we figured out why. It took time, but we got there." They met a human woman named who had been born completely blind. She had never seen a color, never watched a sunset, never observed the visual world that sighted creatures took for granted. Yet she had created an algorithm for generating visual art that was considered some of the most beautiful work in the galaxy. Her pieces hung in museums on 100 worlds. "I cannot see," said, "but I can understand. I learned how other people describe beauty. I learned the mathematics of color and form. I built something that could create what I could not perceive. It is not the same as seeing, but it is something." Ka compiled her findings with growing unease. The humans were not lying. They were not cheating. They were not receiving secret help from other species. They were simply doing something that should have been impossible. They were succeeding through pure persistence. After 6 months on Earth, Ka called a meeting with her investigation team. They gathered in a conference room at what the humans called the United Nations, a building where representatives from all of humanity's nations came together to argue and occasionally cooperate. "I have reached a conclusion," Ka announced. "It will not be popular." The other investigators waited. They were from many different species, each chosen for their particular skills in detecting fraud and error. None of them had found any evidence of deception. "The human innovations are genuine," Ka said. "They really did develop these technologies. They really did solve these problems. And they did it without any biological advantage." "That is impossible," said Nine, a crystalline being who served as the team's logical analyst. "Innovation requires capacity. You cannot discover what your brain cannot process." "I would have agreed with you before this assignment," Ka replied. "But I have spent 6 months feeling the bioelectric fields of hundreds of humans. They believe what they are saying. They are not hiding anything. They simply did what they claim to have done." "Then how do you explain it?" Nine demanded. Ka was silent for a long moment. She had been thinking about this question for weeks. She had turned it over and over, looking for an answer that preserved the fundamental assumptions of the index. She had failed. "I believe," she said finally, "that humans innovate from desire rather than from adaptation. They do not discover what they are built to discover. They discover what they choose to discover. They simply decide that a problem is interesting, and then they refuse to stop working on it until they solve it or die." The room erupted in objections. This could not be right. This violated everything the index understood about intelligence. This suggested that 12,000 years of careful observation had missed something fundamental about how discovery worked. But Ka had felt the truth in hundreds of human hearts. She had sensed the calm certainty with which they described their methods. She had found no deception anywhere. "I know it sounds impossible," she said, "but I have come to call it the principle after the first human I interviewed. The principle states that biological advantage is not the only path to innovation. Desire combined with persistence can achieve similar results. It is slower and less efficient. It requires enormous tolerance for failure, but it works." The implications of this statement hung in the air like a weight. If Ka was right, then the index would need to revise its fundamental understanding of intelligence. Categories would need to be changed. Predictions would need to be adjusted. Everything they thought they knew about why species discovered what they discovered would be called into question. Nine spoke for everyone when he said, "This changes everything." Ka's sensory tendrils rippled with agreement. She had come to Earth expecting to expose a fraud. Instead, she had discovered something far more disturbing. Humanity had proven that the rules could be broken. They had shown that wanting something badly enough could sometimes be as powerful as being built for it. They had demonstrated that the boundaries other species accepted did not have to apply to them. It was, by galactic standards, completely insane. It was also undeniably true. The debate over what came to be called the amendment lasted 11 years. In that time, it nearly destroyed the Universal Engineering Index. The index had stood for 12,000 years as the definitive record of galactic innovation. It had survived wars and plagues and the rise and fall of empires. Its fundamental assumptions had been tested countless times and had never been found wanting. Species discovered what they were built to discover. Innovation flowed from biological advantage. These were not opinions. They were observations drawn from of careful study. Now a single species threatened to overturn everything. Archivists followed the debate with intense interest, had been the first to notice the human anomaly, and the geometric being felt a certain responsibility for what followed. If it simply ignored the strange data, the index might have continued unchanged for another 12,000 years. But had not ignored it, had done what archivists were supposed to do, report the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. The opposition to the amendment was fierce. Many species had built their entire identities around their place in the index. They were proud of their mastery of gravitational physics. They defined themselves by their dominance of optical computing. These species did not want to hear that a young race of soft-bodied primates could achieve similar results through mere stubbornness. If the humans can do it, one representative argued, then our achievements mean nothing. We are no longer special. We are simply the first to discover what any species could discover if they tried hard enough. This fear drove much of the resistance. The index had always validated the importance of biological diversity. Each species contributed something unique because each species was unique. But if humans could innovate in any field simply by deciding to do so, then biological diversity no longer determined discovery. Desire and persistence could substitute for evolution. Some species found this threatening, others found it liberating. A delegation from a young species that had only recently achieved spoke in favor of the amendment. For generations, their representative said, we have been told that our biology limits our contributions. We evolved in low gravity, so we cannot understand high-pressure physics. We have poor eyesight, so we cannot advance optical sciences. But the humans have shown that these limits may not be real. Perhaps we too can discover things we were not built to discover. The debate grew heated. There were accusations of fraud despite Ka's thorough investigation. There were claims that the humans had somehow deceived the investigation team. There were attempts to suppress the findings entirely, to pretend that the anomaly had never been detected. 3 times, factions within the index came close to splitting away entirely. 3 times, compromise was reached at the last moment. But with each near schism, it became clearer that the index could not simply ignore what the humans had done. In the 9th year of the debate, something changed. New reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Other species had started experimenting with what some called human-style research programs. Though a species known for their mastery of agricultural chemistry had established a research group focused on gravitational physics. This made no sense by traditional standards. They had no biological advantage in this field. Their brains were optimized for understanding chemical bonds, not space-time curvature. By every measure, their program should have failed. But it did not fail. After only 4 years, the team published a paper that advanced gravitational theory in a small but significant way. The breakthrough was not revolutionary. It would not change the galaxy overnight, but it should have been impossible. The researchers described their method in simple terms. They had read everything written about gravitational physics. They had built simulations and models. They had failed repeatedly. They had kept trying. Eventually, something had worked. It was the principle in action. Similar reports came from other species. They who had evolved in total darkness were making progress in visual spectrum analysis. They whose hive mind structure should have limited them to collective thinking had produced an individual genius who was advancing single consciousness mathematics. Everywhere, species were attempting things that their biology should have prohibited. Not every attempt succeeded. Many research programs produced nothing despite years of effort. The human method was not magic. It did not guarantee results, but it produced results far more often than the traditional models predicted. In the 11th year, the vote was finally held. 9,000 representatives from across the galaxy cast their decisions. The margin was narrow. Only 62 votes separated victory from defeat, but in the end, the amendment passed. The formal language was careful and precise. A new category of innovation source was added to the index: aspirational discovery, human type. The definition read as follows: innovations arising not from biological, environmental, or cognitive predisposition, but from the deliberate choice to attempt solutions outside one's natural domain, sustained by cultural tolerance for failure and individual persistence despite absence of inherent advantage. Critics immediately attacked the new category. They called it meaningless, a polite way of describing random chance. They argued that it reduced the entire index to a catalog of accidents. They predicted that it would undermine respect for genuine biological achievements. But supporters saw something different. They saw a new path forward, a way for species to escape the limits that evolution had imposed on them. They saw hope. Archivist was invited to write the historical preface for the amendment. Spent years composing a single paragraph. Every word was chosen with care, every phrase balanced against its alternatives. The text would be translated into 11 million languages and read by uncounted trillions of beings. It needed to be perfect. The final version read: for 12, the index operated on an unexamined assumption that discovery is an expression of inherent nature, that each species finds what it was always destined to find. Humanity has disproven this. They have demonstrated that innovation can arise from will as readily as from adaptation, that a species with no particular gifts can achieve breakthroughs in any field simply by deciding that the boundaries others accept need not apply to them. The index now recognizes that the question, what are they equipped to discover, may be less important than what have they decided to try. We credit humanity not merely with their innovations, but with proving that innovation itself can be an act of choice. This changes everything. The amendment entered the index on the centennial of humanity's first contact with the galactic community. On Earth, the occasion was marked with celebrations and speeches. In the archives, it was recorded as a turning point in the history of intelligence itself. In the decades that followed, 17 species formally adopted human-type research programs. They trained their young to attempt problems outside their evolutionary scope. They taught them that failure was not shameful but necessary. They encouraged persistence in the face of repeated disappointment. 4 of these programs produced significant breakthroughs within a single generation. 2 more achieved results that would have seemed impossible just 50 years earlier. The galaxy had believed that innovation was destiny, that each species was locked into a path determined by biology and environment. Humanity had proven that innovation could also be a choice. They had shown that wanting something badly enough and refusing to give up could sometimes overcome the limits that nature imposed. It was not an efficient method. It required enormous effort for uncertain results. It demanded a tolerance for failure that many species found difficult to cultivate, but it worked. Ka, who had conducted the original investigation, lived long enough to see the transformation she had helped set in motion. In her final report to the index, filed shortly before her death at the age of 407, she offered a simple summary of what humanity had taught the galaxy. They proved that we are not prisoners of our nature. We can choose what we wish to understand. We can decide what we wish to discover. It will not be easy. It will not be quick. But if we persist long enough with enough determination, we can achieve things our ancestors never imagined. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy, not their inventions, remarkable as those are. Their gift is the proof that any species can innovate in any field if they want it badly enough and refuse to stop trying. The galaxy had called it stubbornness. It had called it inefficiency. It had called it a waste of resources. But in the end, it called it progress. And slowly, one species at a time, the galaxy began to learn.